This is the European History Lecture for Friday, the 7th of April, May, not April, 2021. And if you haven't yet seen it, see Little Shop of Horrors. Very, very good. Creepy plant. Very, very good. So, we have seen how Japan has seen weakness in the West and opportunity in the East and has decided to step up as the leader of Asia to drive the Europeans out and bring all of Asia under Japan. We have seen how Italy, under Mussolini, has also taken advantage of the weakness of the West by going into, well, by using poison gas in Libya, which was an Italian colony, by invading from Italian Eritrea on the coast of the Red Sea inland to conquer Ethiopia, to avenge the Italian defeat in the 1890s at Adawa, and the Italian army is a mixture of a tragic, comic Keystone Cops on the one hand. On the other hand, they use poison gas against tribesmen. So on the one hand, they're buffoons. On the other hand, they're bullies and absolutely vicious and cruel. In both cases, the League of Nations has an opportunity to step up and take action. The whole principle of collective security is on the line. Did Wilson's notion that having a league of countries that would come together against aggression have any validity? And the answer is Japan leaves the League of Nations without consequence other than nasty letters, and later goes on to conquer China. And Italy has no fear of League of Nations reprisals, which take the form of ineffective sanctions. If there was a world policeman after World War I, since America refused to step up, it was the weakened British and French backing the League of Nations. But they have clearly shown that they're not on the job. They're either on strike or they are simply sleeping in their patrol car. They are not engaged in policing the world. To take this image further, and if you've actually given credence to the notion of defunding the police, I would like you to take a moment and imagine what a society would be like without police. If you believe that it would be a lovely anarchy, yes.
I do believe this isn't directly from me, but from the people who I've talked about that concept with, it's not necessarily just getting rid of the police altogether. It's splitting it up into different units so that it's not people showing up with guns to cases in which it's emotionally very unstable. So instead of having one all-purpose unit to show up to everywhere and do all this stuff, you'd have a whole ton of different units designed for different stuff. So whenever you call 911, it's not people with guns, tasers, and pepper spray showing up to your door when maybe you just got hurt a little bit.
I wonder how many. No, I'll say that differently. That sounds like a fine theoretical answer. If we had infinite resources, we could match social workers who specialize in family dysfunction and send them out. There are some problems with that, though. And there are problems that the people who are on the reduce, reallocate, or defund the police, for lack of a better term, do not answer. And it's on them to answer it since they're proposing ending something that has worked in human history since the first culture. It's again, we're questioning things like do we need a police or does gender exist or any of these other things that no one in history has questioned. So, are there infinite resources and is there infinite time to allocate precise responses to specific needs? I have never seen a police force funded well enough to do that, number one. Number two, I have had family in police. I have thought about this issue many, many times. When neighbors call the cops for a domestic dispute, and I will call on you, which is the worst kind of dispute for patrolmen to be called to because it's completely unpredictable, they're not just calling because it's loud. They're calling because violence is in the air. Without those guns, that pepper spray, the intimidation factor, there is nothing to hold back an abuser. In fact, the abuser is likely going to expand their abuse because they're furious. They're not thinking clearly. It is a theoretician's response. It is not a response rooted in the realities that I at least have experienced. Yes.
My grandfather was a cop for 36 years, and so this topic is kind of like an important topic in our house. And so I think personally, to have the police unit split into that many sectors is kind of a dangerous way to handle it because these situations are very emotionally high. People, like, if you're calling the cops, it's because you're scared. The person who is harming you is not okay, and there needs to be that intimidation factor because without that, the person who is harming the other person is going to think they can do anything and just shove that social worker or person without weapons aside.
I've been a social worker. I'm the son of a police officer. I couldn't agree more. And here's why. If you think of any hysterical anger moment that you've seen or that you've been involved in, you know, gut level, there's a time to talk and there's a time not to talk. When you have somebody in the depths of hysteria, it's not the time to talk. They are not thinking with their mind. They are acting out of their glands. In a case like that, force is often necessary. To stabilize the situation, that means to keep everyone safe. After that is done, probably after the person has had a chance to cool down, then maybe it's time to talk. Yes.
So, in the whole idea of like having a whole ton of different sectors, the police officers that do exist today would still exist. It's not like officers go into these
Not
situations.
everyone who says defund the police says that. Please go on. You're saying that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
So,
go.
the officers would most likely still be armed, and they go into those situations knowing that they might need to use that. But in other situations that might not be as tense and as violent,
Mhm.
it would be useful to not have that extra added stress of someone with a firearm standing 3 feet away from you.
I'm not sure I agree. And it's not that I just want to disagree with you. I appreciate your talking to me. I appreciate your bringing up the other point of view. And my goal is not to prove you wrong. My goal is to discuss this thoughtfully. I don't think that the intimidation factor that police bring to a situation today is a bad thing. I think that even me, somebody as friendly, well, actually, I'll let you guys talk. You were next, and then I'll go back to you.
Wouldn't it be better to give them more funding and put it towards better training? So they not
That's what was done in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. We had a police force before the 1970s that was basically a force that dealt with things through restraint. They would restrain the situation. These guys were combat veterans for the most part, and they were good at what they did. But in the 70s, a decision was made that society was more complicated. So community policing was set up, police in schools were set up, police outreach to children at risk were set up. All of these social worker adjuncts to the primary police force were set up. And more training in nonviolent responses were all set up. Also, more and more police come with a college education, and that means a background in what professors think criminal justice is all about. So those steps were taken. The police forces today, despite what you see on the news, despite the hyperbolic politicization of things, are not the police forces of the early 1960s loosing dogs and fire hoses on civil rights protesters. Those kinds of cops haven't existed since I was 10, even then. So we did that. Defunding the police, what is happening is the very programs that are designed for social outreach have been cut because the primary function of police is to serve and protect and to keep society from being destroyed by criminals. And you know, if you have to choose between patrolmen and social workers, you're going to choose to keep patrolmen because without social workers, the basic job can still be done, just not as well. Yeah, and you'll get last word.
I think to also shed light on this conversation, what we hear from the news is very biased, very political, and very people pleasing. It's never totally true, and it's most of the time it's very one sided from one point of view, and like knowing many cops in my family, I know that at least 80% are here to do the job, to do it right, and to save as many people they can without using any form of violence.
Absolutely.
And I think that point is very like hidden behind shadows in this age that we live in because people are scared, especially right now, and people are very like unknowing what the future is going to be, and so we're kind of in this state of fight or flight.
Yes.
And it's like the news is never going to be correct.
Unfortunately, as long as I've been alive, ratings, I think before that, ratings drove news. And ratings responds to sensationalism. The kind of panic journalism that you see and you're talking about does get a lot of eyeballs on screens, which is what it's for. Unfortunately, it panics people. You're right, in a variety of directions. It creates a crisis that doesn't exist. The statistics alone do not argue that we have police that are brutal. They argue quite the contrary. There are so few cases that each individual case is made into a cause celeb in order to sell things. There are so many cases of violence within the ghettos, of violence within poor communities of all colors, where criminals prey on civilians, and the only hope those civilians have are the police. But that doesn't sell, unfortunately. And even more unfortunately, people who are emotional don't always make the best decisions. Anyway, you've heard my side. We got on this, but that's fine. Do you wish to say the last word?
Yeah, sure. So, I had an uncle who was in the Kootenai County SWAT team for a while and continued to be in the sheriff's department up until 2 years ago. He's about 50 now. He's been in the service for quite a long time. I'm well aware that they are definitely not trying to do the stuff that happened in the George Floyd trial and other acts that have happened around the country in the most recent decade or so. And I understand that definitely the majority of cops have good intentions, and it's the sore thumbs that stick out that are most publicized, and it makes, the stupid ones are always the loudest, and always the most important. So.
Okay. That is a nice, moderate statement. I appreciate it. Do you have something?
Mine's very minor, because I don't think I can talk too much on it. I don't have much family in police. I definitely have the opinion that they should be kept. That's fine. But, because my only relative in the force is Belgian, and he works as a police officer in France. And I don't think he...
That's a totally different situation, but yeah. Are they even armed? I know British are not armed. I think French police are armed.
Yeah, I'd sure hope he has a gun. I don't want him getting into trouble. But, so yeah, I mean...
What is it you want to say? You talk about your background.
I just think, no matter where it is, there needs to be someone to regulate society. What would be I don't know the best word there, but so, disputes that don't require, an army, but, a small force.
You never want your military to police. You never, ever, ever. If military are engaged in policing, it's because a war has just happened, and they're the only ones there. Because the whole outlook of police is utterly different. Soldiers are trained in aggression, to kill people and break things, to win at all costs. Even today, police are trained in restraint. When I started teaching, I used to explain that people go to teacher training school to be patient with situations that they wouldn't normally be patient with. Police, even more so. So much more so. I deal occasionally with people in crisis. That's what they do every single day. And they are trained not to use force, to use minimal force. In the end, unless we want our robot overlords to police us, which would be bad, everyone, and this is in response to something you said, Garrett, everyone can be stupid. The most brilliant, restrained, thoughtful, wise person, if they're in a situation where adrenaline is flowing through their veins and things are happening that they need to immediately respond to, everyone is capable of doing a very bad thing. It's an accident. I believe there was one of the recent cases where a female officer discharged a weapon because she thought she had her taser. It seemed very, very clear. Now that's an accident. By the way, I'm not saying you're wrong. I was trying to point out, and everyone can be stupid in certain situations. I exemplify that many times. In other cases, oh God, why am I going on with this? What is wrong with me? I got a few hours of sleep. That's what's wrong with me. You guys, you're much younger than I am. You're able to handle it better than I am. Okay, fine. I'll say it. Girl wielding knife attacking other girl. Police officer absolutely does right thing and uses deadly force because knife wielding. This is a classic case of when it is okay, when you need to use deadly force. I decide that I'm sick of mispronouncing your name. I call you Alyssa. You tell me it's Elise. I get embarrassed. So that's it. I'm going to end you and end the problem. Sienna sees this and decides that she is going to stop me from stabbing you. You don't have time to talk. You draw and shoot. And the thing about a taser is it may or may not work depending upon my clothing. So in a case where you are protecting the life of another, that is classic where deadly force is authorized. And yet, because we live in such poisonous political climate, it's become a controversy. People are arguing, well, she should have just... No! That's what you learn! Yes.
So,
And maybe I can actually give you the last word. Thank you. Go.
Okay, so earlier this year, actually, in 2021, during quarantine, there was this dude who was in my neighborhood. He was 2 blocks away from me. And the police were called because there was a large noise, and he was, pulling knives and being all weird. And the police came, and he was like, "Oh, what are you gonna do?" And so he pulled a knife on the police. Right? That's his first mistake. Turns out they later figured out he was on a mixture of OxyContin, methamphetamine, and
Video
crack
2
cocaine.
coming up.